Welcome to Who's That Pokémon, the most in-depth Pokémon anime rewatch podcast on the entire internet. If you didn't know, this is a retrospective look back on the Pokémon anime series, episode by episode from the very beginning. This show has been airing for over 20 years now and has over 1,000 episodes, yet it seems to get neglected by Pokémon fans, so I thought it was about time it got a podcast entirely dedicated to it. Today's episode is the 13th episode of the Indigo League series titled Mystery at the Lighthouse. The Japanese title is Masaki's Lighthouse. This episode first aired on June 24, 1997 in Japan and on September 24, 1998 in the United States. On this day in Pokemon history for the Japanese air date, in 2000 in the US, the previously banned episode Beauty and the Beach debuted for the first time ever on Cartoon Network in a heavily edited version. And as far as I'm aware, this premiere of Beauty and the Beach on Cartoon Network in 2000 is the only time this episode has ever been played outside of Japan. I think Cartoon Network played it once and then for some reason just decided to never play it again. Nobody else has ever played it again. Netflix doesn't have access to the dubbed version. It's not on any of the DVDs. It's really quite strange actually, because obviously the original version they had problems with that, so they banned it. But then they dubbed it, they edited it down to, I assume what they thought was acceptable. So why isn't this heavily edited episode available anywhere? It's just very bizarre. We also have in 2004, Pokemon Colosseum was released in Australia, which this is one of my blind spots in the Pokemon series. I never had a GameCube, so I never got to play Colosseum or XD Gale of Darkness. So that's probably, those two games right there are probably my biggest blind spots when it comes to the Pokemon franchise. But, due to the wonders of technology, I actually have the ability to play those now, so I'm sure I will get to Colosseum and Gale of Darkness at some point in the future. On this day in Pokemon history for the American air date, for once we've actually got nothing of note, a bit of a role reversal there for the Japanese and American air dates. The screenplay for this episode was written by Takeshi Shudo. This was his fourth credited screenplay, taking him ahead of Atsuhiro Tomioka for the most episodes written so far. He last wrote for the Pokemon anime on the episode The School of Hard Knocks. So in this episode, we've got the debut of Bill, and we also have a couple of Pokemon debuts here. We have Ash's Crabby making its debut, and we also have Dragonite making its first appearance in the anime, albeit in a shroud of mystery. The Who's That Pokemon is none other than Crabby in honor of Ash catching Crabby. And with all of that said and done, it's time to move on to the episode summary and discussion. So the episode begins with Ash wandering through the forest with his friends. He begins bragging about his accomplishments, but Misty claims all of his Pokemon simply followed him instead of him actually catching them, and therefore he is, lesser as a trainer. This angers Ash, who then runs off through the forest, vowing to legitimately catch a Pokemon. And I say this almost every episode at this point, but this episode, it starts off with yet another recap of Ash's journey, and it almost quite literally reintroduces every single thing about the show, which in previous episodes it would recap certain bits, but this almost seems like a real jumping in point, in case some kids have jumped in over the past 12 episodes or whatever. This is sort of the reset button, kind of introducing them to all of the sort of things they might have missed out on if they hadn't been watching it episode by episode. This episode also basically exclusively takes place at dusk and night, which is just extremely in my wheelhouse. I love the episodes that's set at night in the anime, and this one is, apart from briefly at the end, we basically don't see any daylight. Going back to the recap at the beginning, just for a little brief moment, during this, we actually see several unidentified Pokemon League badges in the background, which the anime just loved chucking these in. We obviously get the iconic one where Gary has 10 badges, and most of those badges are badges that, we don't really know what they are. It's just a complete mystery what they are. And here, we've got more of the same, which I like to believe that this is basically canon, that there are more than 8 gyms in the anime, at least, in Kanto. I thought the part of the recap where it really heavily emphasizes that Ash has 6 Pokemon now made it extremely obvious that we were going to find out what happens when he catches the 7th. It's so on the nose about how they're setting this episode up. And they really just shit all over Ash in this opening. Like, Misty and Brock are just really putting him down, and they sort of keep him grounded most of the time. But I thought here it just almost came off as really mean-spirited. I mean, Misty's always sort of mean-spirited, but even Brock was kind of joining in. And just, I don't know, I felt a little bit unfair for my dude Ash. They also really make it seem like Ash doesn't try to catch Pokemon when it's actually the opposite at the moment. He's kind of tried to catch a Pokemon in basically every episode so far, but most of the time he ends up being screwed over by some sort of ridiculous shenanigans, which either they make the Pokemon get away or the Pokemon's owned by someone else. Like, he's not missing out on catching Pokemon for lack of trying. We also already have an error here. In the dubbed version, when Misty tells Ash that all his Pokemon followed him, she's actually incorrect, because Pikachu was given to him by Professor Oak, Butterfree was caught as a Caterpie, Bulbasaur and Pidgeotto were caught in a legitimate battle, and Squirtle and Charmander were the only ones that followed him, so most of them actually didn't just follow along with him. And Ash further exemplifies this error by saying, "Now I really caught one," after he catches Crabby in just a moment. Also, when the title card hits after Ash sprints off out through the forest, we literally haven't seen a glimpse of the titular Lighthouse, let alone been exposed to any sort of mystery, which I feel is actually pretty rare for the Pokemon anime to do that, to sort of open on something that doesn't really directly relate to what the episode is about. You see it a lot with like something like the show The Simpsons, for example, where the first act will be like something completely unrelated, and then eventually they wind up at what the plot of that episode is going to be about. And it's usually the complete opposite for Pokemon. So it's strange when you get to this episode and they spend the first good chunk of the episode talking about catching Pokemon and about Ash's sort of inability as a trainer. And then it just pivots completely once they go to the lighthouse. So Ash finds himself on a beach and notices a small Crabby scurrying between his feet. Ash insults Crabby for its small size and challenges Crabby to a battle. Not even bothering to call upon one of his Pokemon, Ash lunges at Crabby with a stick. When Crabby slices it with little effort, Ash throws a Pokeball and catches it. When the Pokeball is transferred to Oak's lab, Misty informs Ash that trainees can carry a maximum of 6 Pokemon with them at one time. Suddenly, Pikachu begins jumping and looking at a distant object, alerting the gang to a lighthouse on a cliff. Excited, they all run towards it.
Pokeball, go! Good try, Krabby, but not good enough.
They really do make Crabby look insanely pathetic in this moment. It's just absolutely tiny, and I don't remember them making it look that minuscule when it comes back later on. It is more sort of in line with what you would think of a regular Crabby in Pokemon, but here it is basically the size of a genuine crab you would find in real life, which it really does emphasize how scrawny it is. I also think it's so weird that the writers have Ash catch Crabby, and then quite literally he never uses it again until the Pokemon League. It really does feel like the writers didn't know how to handle Ash having more than 6 Pokemon. I'll just jump into the trivia now. I'm moving ahead a bit, but Crabby was the first Pokemon obviously caught by Ash when he already had a full party of 6 Pokemon in hand. But this wouldn't happen again until Ash caught Sewaddle in Sewaddle and Burr in the Pinwheel Forest, which was 662 episodes later. So I think clearly this region and having Ash catch so many Pokemon and then not really knowing what to do with it, the writers were like, you know what, it just doesn't work if Ash has more than 6 Pokemon. We have to leave one out. And I mean, it doesn't really just happen with Crabby. It also happens when he catches his Muck, and it also happens when he catches his Tauros. Like, they just sit at Oaks forever until they get called up for either the Pokemon League or the Orange League. So, like, honestly, it would have been better if they had have just stuck with 6 Pokemon, because as a result, those Pokemon are often forgotten about, and they really don't have much personality. Like, you couldn't tell me the personality of Crabby or Tauros. To be fair, they do a better job of giving Muck stuff to work with by having him, constantly smothering people at Oak's lab. So I guess I have to give them credit there. It is a little bit better. I still don't know why Ash attacks Crabby with a stick. It's so absurd that he just runs at it with the stick, but he doesn't swing it. He just kind of pokes at it, kind of like he's jousting with it. It's really weird, but I mean, he ends up catching Crabby, so who am I to question his successful methods? The successful capture of Crabby actually makes this the 4th episode in a row where Ash catches a Pokemon, which is the longest streak of consecutive episodes in which a main character obtains a new Pokemon in the anime to date, which I don't know if we'll ever actually see that happen again. You have obviously the trio of episodes of him catching the starters, and then they add a 4th on for good measure, which, I just can't see that ever happening ever again. So because Ash's Crabby has just been introduced now, I've got a crap load of Crabby trivia. I hope you guys are ready for this avalanche. So Crabby actually holds the distinction of being Ash's only Pokemon to win a Pokemon League match single-handedly that wasn't a one-on-one battle. So Crabby actually is pretty damn fierce in the battling arena. Crabby is also Ash's first and so far only Pokemon to evolve during a Pokemon League match. However, this may have changed in the Alola League. I'm not up to date with what's going on with the Alola League, and I think he had Meltan maybe evolve during the league. I obviously could look this up, but yeah, I think from memory that happened, so that makes this actually kind of incorrect at the moment. Well, it was correct for a damn near like 2 decades, so it's good enough. Moving way ahead, when obviously Crabby has evolved into Kingler, this is the Silver Conference we're talking about now, it becomes injured by multiple Voltorb, and because of this, it's the only one of Ash's Pokemon at the time to not participate in the Silver Conference. So it goes from being an absolute star in the Indigo League to the Silver Conference where it actually doesn't get featured. In Pokemon Yellow, Crabby's encounter rate is actually 70% as opposed to Red and Blue's encounter rate of 33%. In addition, in Yellow only, it is possible to catch Kingler by fishing on Route 25. These additions of commonness are likely made as a reference to Ash's Kingler, which, you know what, I do enjoy every time these crop up, but I still think way more references to the anime should have happened. Especially more obvious references, because that's such a specific thing you have to do, and I'm sure most players of Pokemon Yellow would never have even encountered that reference, let alone understood that it was a reference. And finally, Kingler is the only Pokemon Ash caught in Kanto that did not appear in the flesh or in a flashback during the Best Wishes series, only appearing in the picture at the end of The Dream Continues. So after Kanto, Kingler/Crabby gets really shafted. It basically doesn't exist at this point. But back to the actual episode at hand here, I just think that there is way too much heavy-handed explaining of the world's mechanics in this opening sort of section. They really just spend the first 6 minutes of the episode explaining how things work until we finally get to see the Lighthouse mentioned in the episode's title. We have to dedicate so much time to recapping, and then we go into a heavy-handed explanation of how transferring Pokemon work, which it's just completely contradicted, which it makes the explanation even worse. So Brock mentions that trainers can switch their Pokemon in their party by pressing a button inside the Pokedex, which suggests that additional Pokemon are kept in computer storage similar to the games. However, this rule is obviously immediately dropped in future episodes because Ash always calls Professor Oak and has him send the Pokeball, which he then exchanges with the Pokemon he wants to send to Oak's lab. So it's just, it's another example of them not having all of their shit together at the start of the anime and it coming back to bite them in the ass later on. By the time the gang arrives at the lighthouse, night has fallen and the long walk has made them exhausted. Ash rings the bell, only to be greeted by an eerie ringing and a mysterious voice asking them to identify themselves. After Ash and his friends explain their situation and Brock offers to cook for the lighthouse keeper, they're granted access. However, as the door swings open, they find there is no one there to greet them. Ash asks for permission to use the lighthouse's phone and is directed to a mysterious video phone near them. Ash calls Professor Oak to ask about his newly caught Crabby.
Guess we better ring the bell.
I got it.
Who's there?
Excuse us, sir, but we're travelers and we're lost.
We've got a small emergency here and we need to use your telephone, please, sir.
So when they're chatting to Bill through the intercom at the front door, Brock offers to cook some super bacon deluxe cheeseburgers. Well, that's not the exact title, but it's not that far off it. I think this is extremely bizarre. Brock wanting to just cook in some random stranger's kitchen. Like, just imagine this. You're sitting at home, it's night, it's dark out, all on your own. Somebody knocks on your door, you answer it, and they immediately request to cook burgers in your kitchen. If that happened to me, I would be slamming the door, locking it, bolting it up, shoving the fridge in front of it so no one could get in, then immediately calling the police because this person is clearly crazy. Speaking of the front door, there is an error here. Mewtwo is shown on the Lighthouse door, but because Mewtwo hadn't been created yet by Team Rocket, well, it's a continuity error. There's no way anybody knew about Mewtwo, and it's just a real oversight here. They just added a bunch of Pokemon there when, well, Mewtwo's... Again, going back to it, they haven't got all their shit together. Later on, they decide, you know what, Mewtwo was created by Team Rocket, and we're going to have that story play out in the show. And it comes back and just makes this look silly. Like, obviously, people wouldn't know Mewtwo existed because he didn't exist. As Oak picks up, he's shown cooking dinner, and Ash is enraged to learn that Gary has also caught a Crabby. He becomes even angrier when he sees how large it is compared to his own. Ash is further humiliated when he finds out that Gary has already caught 45 Pokemon, dwarfing his mere 7. Oak tells them that they are calling from Bill's Lighthouse and that he is a very knowledgeable Pokemon researcher who knows more than Oak himself. Bill overhears the conversation and accepts Professor Oak's request to give the trio a crash course in Pokemon. The lights inside the lighthouse then turn on and a giant Kabuto appears claiming to be the keeper of the lighthouse. Meanwhile, Team Rocket has set their sights on stealing all of the rare Pokemon inside Bill's lighthouse. They say their motto and begin their ascent up the sea cliff.
Well, there's no way I can ignore a request from the great Professor Oak.
Ugh.
I am Bill of the Lighthouse.
Now, it's kind of weird that Professor Oak is legitimately excited at the thought of eating Gary's Crabby. He obviously talks down on Ash's Crabby because, you know, it's too small to get a good meal out of, but he sees that huge hulking Crabby that Gary caught and he actually sounds excited to eat a Pokemon. Speaking of which, this is actually one of the very few episodes that mention people eating Pokemon, as obviously Ash is worried about Professor Oak eating his Crabby, and then Oak makes the mention of eating Gary's Crabby. This is also the first time that Ash and one of his rivals are confirmed to have a Pokemon of the same species. Gary's Crabby is also the first Pokemon Gary is confirmed to own, so we won't learn what his starter Pokemon was until way until the Silver Conference, but we find out he has a Crabby. We also really need to address Team Rocket's decision to climb the jagged cliff face instead of taking the easy path up towards Bill's house. They basically just break the fourth wall here with their conversation, where they're like, no, we're the bad guys, we have to do it tough and climb up the cliff face, when it literally makes zero sense why they just wouldn't walk up the path that leads straight to Bill's door, and then, I mean, if they don't want to go through the front door, which I'm assuming was probably just unlocked, that they could have just snuck in, they can sneak around the side, it would have been fine, but no, they climb up the cliff face purely for plot purposes, I guess. Ash and his friends eventually realise that the Kabuto is a costume made by Bill, who has been stuck in a Pokemon suit for hours. Bill then explains that there are more than 150 known Pokemon species, but there is only one Pokemon he's searching for at the moment, which he claims is the largest Pokemon ever. He says it's unique and that no one has ever laid eyes on it. He takes the trio up to the observation deck to overlook the ocean. He reveals that he heard a strange noise coming across the ocean from the Pokemon one night, but that was the last time that he ever heard it.
The Pokemon wanders because it's alone. It's the only Pokemon of its species, one of a kind. One night, I heard this very strange sound coming across the ocean. I want to meet you. That's what it said to me.
I think Bill being stuck in a costume is honestly way weirder than him being transformed into an actual Pokemon. Like, he gives an explanation of how him being in the costume really helps him get inside the mind of Pokemon, and it's especially useful for an extinct Pokemon like Kabutops, but it's Kabuto, I should say, and like I get that, but also it's still really, really weird. It's basically him being Bill's a furry. Bill is a furry. So Bill is actually voiced by Maddie Blaustein, and this is the very first time Maddie would provide a voice of an important character in the show, although she had already appeared in 2 episodes as a character of the day, so she is making her mark on the show, but this is the first time an actual character of some sort of importance would be voiced by her, although it's debatable how important Bill is, considering I don't believe we ever see him ever again. In this episode, Bill is depicted as having green hair, which this is the only time in any sort of Pokemon media that he's depicted this way. Every other example has him with brown hair, which I don't know why they did this. It's very, very bizarre. Also in the English dub of the anime, his Kansai dialect is portrayed as a British English accent, while in the Pokemon Adventures manga, this dialect becomes a Southern American accent, so another little bit of diverging portrayals of Bill. It's also really interesting to note that the Pokemon that Bill ends up mixed up with is different in each sort of piece of media in the Pokemon franchise. So in Generation 1, he is mixed up with an unknown Pokemon. In Generation 3, he's mixed up with a Clefairy. In Generation 7, he is mixed with a Nidorino. In the Pokemon Adventures manga, he's mixed with a Rattata. In the Pokemon Zensho manga, he is mixed with a Nidoran. I can't read that symbol, so it's either male or female. And the anime, he is trapped in a Kabuto costume. So I don't know if they did that on purpose, but it is quite interesting to note that we've got like 6 different examples of Bill getting like mixed up with a Pokemon, and every single time they used a different Pokemon. So Bill's line about there being over 150 species of Pokemon seems pretty silly now that they're basically like, there's 1,000. So him saying, wow, there's over 150 species of Pokemon is being like, it's like if I was to go, wow, there's over 150 humans on planet Earth. Well, it's like, yeah, that's technically correct, but also you're off by about 7 billion odd. So it does seem a little bit silly now in 2019. Outside of Ash catching Crabby and meeting Bill, nothing really happens until the 15-minute mark of this episode, where we finally actually get to the episode's actual mystery. And then at this point, we're left with 7 minutes in the episode. It's such a strange sort of paced and plotted out episode. Like I was mentioning earlier, you get to the title card and nothing about the actual title has appeared yet, and it still takes a whole other scene for them to get to the actual lighthouse, which, yeah, it's just really, really weird compared to all the other episodes so far. As Bill's reminiscing about the big boy Pokemon he encountered that fateful night, he actually hears the same sound suddenly, and a large Dragonite appears rising from the ocean. As it comes closer to the lighthouse, Team Rocket spots it, and initially it admires its beautifully haunting sound. Then, realizing that they're Team Rocket, they begin launching a barrage of missiles to try to catch it. This angers the Dragonite, and it smashes the top of the lighthouse and sends Team Rocket flying with its tail. Bill calls out to it, but to no avail, as the Pokemon simply walks away.
Do we always have to mess up everyone's plans? Even I think this is rotten!
Quit complaining. We could score big with this Pokemon.
We're blasting off again!
Pokemon!
So yes, it would be poor form of me if I didn't mention that the giant Dragonite does eerily resemble the concept of Gigantamaxing in Sword and Shield, which this is just happening so often now. And I mean, it's inevitable. It's like when people are like, oh, The Simpsons predicted it. Well, The Simpsons have almost 700 episodes at this point, so at some point they're probably going to predict a few things in the future correctly, which is, I mean, it's similar with Pokemon. They have over 1,000 episodes now. So at some point, one of the wacky storylines that they have that's exclusive to the anime is probably going to be an idea that's kind of makes its way into the game and the game mechanics. So it's not surprising to see a gigantic Dragonite that resembles Gigantamaxing, especially in an episode that was so long ago. Team Rocket basically just straight up try to murder Dragonite here, where it's just so strange. They also pull bazookas out of absolute thin air because they were climbing a cliff face. They don't really have any chance to have storage or anything, but all of a sudden they just have bazookas and they start trying to murk Dragonite, which you do you, Jesse and James, but I thought you wanted to capture it. I don't know if Giovanni has much use for a dead Dragonite. Even though it's a giant Dragonite, I don't know if he wants a dead one. So Dragonite is obviously the titular mystery of the episode, but it appears and disappears in a flash. It's honestly really weird to name the episode based on it, considering it's the smallest part of the episode. I don't really understand why this episode's called The Mystery of the Lighthouse, and it's not something to do with Bill, at the very least. Because really, it's maybe a minute and a half that the episode actually dedicates to the mystery. So if you were to sit down and you had no knowledge of this episode, you'd be like, oh, cool, that mystery at the lighthouse actually sounds like a pretty enticing episode. That's like something I would want to watch. And then you get to it and you're like, okay, we're going. We still haven't seen a lighthouse, or we've seen a lighthouse. Maybe the mystery's coming now. And then the mystery comes for a hot second, gets attacked by bazookas, and then walks away. Like, I would be very disappointed if I was going into this episode blind. So after all of that, we come to the morning, which I'm not sure whether, did these guys sleep or did they just go through the night? Who knows? Bill seems to be at peace despite failing to learn more about the Pokemon, and he's grateful that he got to see it at all. Ash and his friends then say goodbye to Bill and continue on their journey, and that's the episode. And, well, I mean, I'll jump straight into my thoughts on this episode. I think this is a pretty dull episode. I do love the eerie nighttime and foggy setting, but outside of Ash catching Crabby, not a whole lot actually happens here. They do meet Bill, but he just speaks like a pretentious loser mostly, like speaking in real vague terms about Pokemon. He doesn't actually give the trio a crash course in Pokemon, by the way, Oak, so I feel like you've led them astray. And then the actual mystery of the lighthouse is present for about a minute. The Dragonite shows up, Team Rocket shoots at it for a second, Dragonite swats them away, and then Dragonite returns to the sea. It's honestly an extremely weird episode. What you'd think is supposed to be the main crux of the episode actually plays a minor part. They spend more time on Professor Oak cooking dinner and talking about eating Crabby than they actually do on the titular mystery. So it's just, again, it's baffling. It really feels like the writers wanted to use this episode as a chance to catch viewers up to speed if they hadn't watched earlier episodes, while also using it as a chance to spew out a bunch of information about the world. It's like basically just info dump after info dump in this episode. They used the episode really to tell the audience about how the anime universe handles catching more than 6 Pokemon, and they also address the fact that more Pokemon will be coming in the future, so they stray away from definitively saying that only 150 Pokemon exist. It is nice that they're explaining this to audiences, but it's done in such a dull way, and overall, I just didn't really like this episode. And I don't know, it might be the contender for the worst episode that we've watched so far. It's not like egregiously bad, and I wouldn't even say it's boring, because it does have interesting hooks constantly appearing throughout the episode, but in general, I think just the way it's paced and set out, it's probably the worst episode so far. So a recap of the major events here. Ash catches a Crabby. Ash then learns that a trainer can only have 6 Pokemon on hand at once, and that his extras are automatically sent to reside at Professor Oak's laboratory, even though that's contradicted probably pretty soon. Gary is then revealed to have caught a giant Crabby and own a total of 45 Pokemon, and finally Ash and his friends meet Bill. As for Ash Ketchum's win-loss record, well, it's still at 2 wins and 2 losses, obviously no trainer battles in this episode, and his win streak is still at 1 win. Geez, this show is just extremely light on battling at the moment. Like, we're going to get some more battling in the next episode, but it's been quite a while since Ash has even shown any interest in having a trainer battle. So yeah, it's just, I didn't realize that it was so light on battling until I started trying to keep track of how good Ash Ketchum's win-loss record was. But now it's time for a little bit of extra trivia. And not a whole lot is left over outside of the episode this week. I've only got 2 pieces of trivia. The first is that this is the second episode after Showdown in Pewter City where Team Rocket does appear, but Ash and his friends do not encounter them at all. And finally, the inspiration of this episode is likely based on the short story The Foghorn by Ray Bradbury. In the story, a sea monster who is the only one left of its kind hears a foghorn that sounds similar to its own voice and is attracted to it. And that's a cool thing, a cool concept to base your episode on. Except the episode only really uses that for inspiration for 2 minutes, which is a little bit disappointing. A whole episode based on the foghorn would actually be really, really cool. And honestly, if they didn't have any glaring problems, it could have probably taken the crown for my favourite episode so far. But with all of that said, we're going to head on to our Pokemail segment. Now, my question for you guys this episode is, with the introduction of Gigantamaxing, do you think that the anime will have any reference to the previous examples of giant Pokemon that have already been shown? So we've seen, obviously, this Dragonite. There was Ancient, Gengar, and Alakazam that appeared, and they were pretty gigantic. And there's probably a few other examples of giant Pokemon. So I'm interested to see what you guys think, whether there'll be any sort of reference to that. Personally, I think they won't reference the fact that Ash has seen, gigantic Pokemon in the past and that it's sort of similar. But I wouldn't put it past them doing it. They seem to be doing a lot of interesting stuff with the anime and the movies these days. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them really dig back into the history of the show. And honestly, as a longtime fan, I would love if they started digging back into the show's history like that. It's such a rich history at this point, 20 years basically, and I mean it's over 20 years. What am I saying? And over 1,000 episodes. You've got so much to dig back into. I would love if they started leaning on that much more heavily. But that's going to basically do us for this episode. Thanks for listening to Who's That Pokemon. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're not subscribed to the podcast, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, pretty much any podcast service available in the entire world. You can also find the show on Twitter at Who's That PKMMPod to keep up with the latest updates for the show and my YouTube channel and basically all of that jazz. Any Pokemon kind of rants or ramblings I want to go on, any memes, that's where you'll find them. I'm also on Twitter personally as @SourceMarlow. But as I said, that's all for this episode. I hope you join me next time as I take a look back at Electric Shock Showdown. We'll finally be getting back to some more battling as Ash takes on Lieutenant Surge at the Vermilion City Gym.